B-double-E-double-R-U-N, beer run. B-double-E-double-R-U-N, beer run. That's right, sinners. We're going on a beer run today.
I don't think anyone has a right to take the life when I'm under a
Hello, and welcome to the Synful Show. I'm your host, Father Sin. Hope everyone had a good Labor Day, all the people giving birth to babies today. This episode, we're talking about the history of beer. This was a user-submitted subject. Thank you, Chris, for the idea. Here it is, the history of beer. But before we get going on that, I got to tell you guys about something real quick. We got to talk about Podcoin. Podcoin, yeah, that's right. You listen to a lot of podcasts, why don't you get paid for doing it? Earn Podcoin for listening to podcasts on the Podcoin app. All you got to do is just download the app on your iPhone or your Android device. Use my code Synful and you'll get your first 300 coins. What can you do with Podcoins? Oh, I got you covered there. You could get Amazon or Starbucks gift cards. I believe there's a nice set of Bose headphones on there and a couple other things as well. But if you're an awesome guy like me, I donate all my Podcoin to charity. I do the fight childhood cancer research. So download Podcoin today. Use Synful, get 300 Podcoin. All right, let's get to the meat and potatoes of this episode. The history of beer. Love me some beer. Burr. Now, I didn't realize that beer's been around as long as it has been. It's insane. So sit back, grab a beer, because you're going to get learnt today. Because if you're searching for an original brewmaster to toast the next time you knock back a cold one, you might be out of luck. It's difficult to attribute the invention of beer to a particular culture or a time period. But the world's first fermented beverages most likely emerged alongside the development of cereal agriculture of 12,000 years ago. As hunter-gatherer tribes settled into agrarian civilizations based around staple crops like wheat, rice, barley, and maize, they may have also stumbled upon the fermentation process and started brewing beer. In fact, some anthropologists have argued that these early people's insatiable thirst for hooch may have contributed to the Neolithic Revolution by inspiring new agricultural technologies. The earliest known alcoholic beverage is a 9,000-year-old Chinese concoction made from rice, honey, and fruit. But the first barley beer was most likely born in the Middle East. While people were no doubt imbibing it much earlier, hard evidence of beer production dates back about 5,000 years to the Sumerians of ancient Mesopotamia. Archaeologists have unearthed ceramic vessels from 3400 BC, still sticky, icky, with beer residue. In 1800 BC's Hymn to Ninsaki, an ode to the Sumerian goddess of beer, describes a recipe for a beloved ancient brew made by female priestess. These nutrient-rich suds were a cornerstone of the Sumerian diet and were likely a safer alternative to drinking water from nearby rivers and canals, which were often contaminated by animal waste. Hear that? Beer's more healthier than water. Ha 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 ha. Now, historians speculate that prehistoric nomads may have made beer from grain and water before learning to make bread. Beer became ingrained in the culture of civilizations with no significant viticulture. Noah's provisions included beer on the ark. 4300 BC, Babylonian clay tablets detail recipes for beer. Beer was a vital part of civilization in Babylonian Assyrian, Egyptian, Hebrew, Chinese, and Inca cultures. Babylonians produced beer in large quantities with around 20 varieties. Beer at this time was so valued that it was sometimes used to pay workers as part of their daily wages. Early cultures often drank beer through straws to avoid grain hulls left in the beverage. Egyptians brewed beer commercially for use by royalty, served in gold goblets, medical purposes, and as necessity to be included in burial provisions for the journey to the hereafter. So yeah, you're probably sitting there drinking a beer, just enjoying it right now. People are using this in traditions, rituals, stuff like that. That is awesome. Awesome, awesome, awesome. But different cultures use different grains. Africa used millet, maize, and cassava. North America used persimmon, although agave, I think that's the shit in tequila, that's probably what makes you sick, was used in Mexico. South America used corn, although sweet potatoes were used in Brazil. Japan used rice to make sake. China used wheat to make samshu. Other Asian cultures use sorghum. Russians used rye to make kvass or kvass. Egyptians used barley and may have cultivated it strictly for brewing it as it made poor bread. All right, let's jump back into some of the timelines here. 1600 BC, Egyptian texts contain 100 medical prescriptions calling for beer. Medical beer. Why not? We got medical weed everywhere else now. Medical beer. If an Egyptian gentleman offered a lady a sip of his beer, they were betrothed. Here, have a drink of my beer. Ha ha ha, now I own you. Early brewers used herbals like balsam, hay, dandelion, mint, and wormwood seeds. Whorehound juice. Whorehound juice? I'm going to have to look that one up because I'm already thinking something way off topic on that. And even crab claws and oyster shells for flavorings. Romans brewed cerevisia? Ceres, the goddess of agriculture, and vis meaning strength in Latin. 55 BC, Roman legions introduced beer to the northern Europe. 49 BC, Caesar toasted his troops after crossing the Rubicon, which began the Roman Civil War. Before the Middle Ages, brewing was left to women to make since it was considered a food, as well as celebration drink. Get in the kitchen and make me a beer. I'm getting in all kinds of trouble with this episode. Oh boy. 23 BC, Chinese brewed beer called Kiu. I'm probably pronouncing that wrong, but it's spelled Kiu. And from 500 to 1000 AD, the first half of the Middle Ages, brewing begins to be practiced in Europe. Shifting from family tradition to centralized production in monasteries and convents. Hospitality for traveling pilgrims. Also, during medieval times, beer was used for tithing, trading, payment, and taxing. 1000 AD, hops begins to be used in the brewing process. 1200 AD, beer making is firmly established as a commercial enterprise in Germany, Austria, and England. Germans preferred cold temperatures, lagers, bottom fermentation stored in caves in the Alps. English preferred mild temperature ales, top fermentation stored in cellars. 1295, King Wenceslas grants Pilsen Bohemia brewing rights, formerly Czechoslovakia, now Slovakia and the Czech Republic. 1420, German brewers developed the lager method of brewing. 1489, Germany's first brewing guild, Brauerei Beck, was established. In the 1490s, Columbus found Indians making beer from corn and black birch sap. Where's all my Renaissance fair people at? Think about this next time you go to your next Ren fair. In 1516, Bavarian brewing guilds pushed for the Reinheitsgebot purity laws. I'm probably pronouncing that wrong because it sounds German to me, and I might have a little German blood in me, but I don't speak it. I speak English. But anyways, they come up with these purity laws, which make it illegal to use any ingredients but water, barley, and hops in the brewing of beer. They didn't know yeast existed. 1553, Beck's Brewery, founded and still brewing today. Yeah, Beck's pretty damn good beer. Late 1500s, Queen Elizabeth I of England drank strong ale for breakfast. Hell yeah. 1587, the first beer brewed in New World at Sir Walter Raleigh's colony in Virginia. But the colonists sent requests to England for better beer. 1602, Dr. Alexander Noel, or Now, however you want to say it, discovers that ale can be stored longer in cork-sealed glass bottles. 1612, the first commercial brewery opened in New Amsterdam, New York City, Manhattan, after colonists advertised in London newspapers for experienced brewers. 1620, pilgrims land at Plymouth Rock because the beer supplies were running low. 1674, Harvard College has its own brew house. 1680, William Penn, founder of Pennsylvania, operated a commercial brewery. 1757, Washington wrote his personal recipe to make small beer. 1786, Molson Brewery is founded in what is today Canada. George Washington and Thomas Jefferson had their own private brew houses. God dang, that must be nice. I'll just walk out there and get me a pint now. Sam Adams, yeah, that's a real person. He operated a commercial brewery back then as well. Soldiers in the Revolutionary Army received rations of a quart of beer a day. 1789, James Madison proposes that Congress levy a low 8-cent duty per barrel on malt liquors to encourage the manufacture of beer in every state in the Union. Yeah, government's got to tax everything. Everything. Tax it all. Beer and bread were the mainstays of the ordinary person's diet for centuries. Yeast during this time were exactly the same as those used in bread. So we're moving on up in time. We're about to jump into what you would call modern history now. We're going to jump into the 1800s, but before the 1800s, most beer was really ale. 1810, Munich establishes Oktoberfest right around the corner, guys, all over the place, as an official celebration. In the 1830s, Bavarians Gabriel Sedelmar of Munich and Anton Dreher of Vienna developed the lager method of beer production. 1842, the first golden lager is produced in Pilsen, Bohemia. In the mid of 19th century, around the 1850s, German immigrant brewers introduced cold maturation lagers to the U.S. Anheuser-Busch, Miller, Coors, Stroh, Schlitz, and Pabst roots began here. The modern era of brewing in the U.S. began in the late 1800s with commercial refrigeration, 1860. Automatic bottling, pasteurization, 1876, and railroad distribution. Adolphus Busch. Does that name sound familiar? Well, if not, he pioneers the use of double-walled rail cars, a network of ice houses to make Budweiser the first national brand. 1876, Pasteur unraveled the secrets of yeast and the fermentation process. And he also developed pasteurization to stabilize beers, 22 years before the process was applied to milk. Milk, lemonade, round the corner, fudge is made. 1880, there are approximately 2,300 breweries in the United States. In the 1890s, Pabst is the first U.S. brewer to sell over 1 million barrels in a year. Here's an awesome fact. Good old Teddy Roosevelt in 1909, he brought over 500 gallons of beer on a safari in Africa. In 1914, commercial competition drives the number of operating breweries down to 1,400. 1933, Prohibition ends for beer. That was on April 7th. 1935, only 160 breweries survive Prohibition. In 1935, the beer can is introduced. American Can Company and Kruger Brewing. 1938, Elise Miller John heads Miller Brewing for 8 years as the first and only woman ever to run a major brewing company. 1965, Fritz Maytag purchases Anchor Brewing Company. 1966, Budweiser is the first brand to sell 10 million barrels in a year. 1976, New Albion is the first in the rebirth of brew pubs and microbreweries in the U.S., opening in California. In 1988, Asahi Super Dry, Japanese, introduces new beer category. Soon to follow is Michelob Dry. In 1991, the U.S. produces 20% of the world beer volume, the world's largest. 1992, the U.S. beer industry produced and sold 2.62 billion cases of beer. Estimated per capita, the consumption was 22.7 gallons. That's ranked 13th worldwide. I wonder if I'm going to have to look that up, but I'm guessing maybe the Germans probably ahead of us or on the top of that one. Beer drinkers consumed 5.89 billion gallons, enough to fill the Houston Astrodome over 12 times, or 330 oil tankers. Also in 1992, 5 brewers produced 89.4% of domestic product. Anheuser-Busch was 44.5% of that. Miller Brewing was 21.8%. Coors, 10.4%. Stroh, 7.4%. And G. Heilemann, I'm not good with words today, came in at the bottom at 5.3%. Also in 1992, the world's largest combined site brewer was Anheuser-Busch at 1.166 billion cases. The world's largest single brewery was Coors Brewing, Golden, Colorado, at 272 million cases. 1993, U.S. retail beer sales exceed $45 billion. So we're sitting here and we're up to 1993, but let's take a historical look at the price of beer. We'll have a little bit more explanation in with this as well. The price of beer is an easy thing to take for granted. Since the end of Prohibition, the beer market has transformed itself multiple times. Major and independent breweries alike have collapsed, expanded, and consolidated power. All the while, the price of a pint of beer followed a similarly chaotic path, and it's only begun to stabilize in the past few years. Now, here's the story of the price of beer, told alongside with market trends that eventually make their way down to the drink menu every American sees before ordering a pint at their favorite bar. Now, this is bar prices. In 1952, 65 cents adjusted for inflation, $5.93. 1953, 65 cents adjusted for inflation, $5.80, which doesn't make sense because it's the same damn number and it's just a year in between the two. 1954, 67 cents. Inflation price, $5.93. Again, a year later in 55, 67 cents. Inflation price was $5.91. In the early 1950s, the American beer market was still dealing with the uncertainties and chaos that came in the wake of Prohibition. Some counties, even entire states, continued to enforce temperance laws. That's even after they were repealed on a national level. The temperance movement didn't falter after Prohibition and sought to paint the brewing of beer as a waste of resources during World War II. In the midst of the industry's public relations crisis, breweries sought to reinvent themselves in the eyes of the American public. They pointed to the high thiamine and other vitamin B levels in brewer's yeast, claiming they could make soldiers stronger, faster, harder. The U.S. military eventually agreed and mandate that breweries will allocate 15% of their beer production for soldiers. 1956 through 1959, 56, 57, and 58. 56, cost of a pint was 68 cents, adjusted for inflation, $6.01. 69 cents and 57, same inflation price. And then 58, 69 cents, and inflation price would have been $5.82. And coming in at 1959, 70 cents for a pint, and adjusted for inflation, $5.74. The landscape of beer consumption in post-World War II. America looks strikingly different from the consumption patterns today. Most of us think of the huge expansion of craft beers when we think about what America brews and drinks. But the craft movement that's defined the beer market in the United States was virtually non-existent thanks to the dominance of a few major companies, Anheuser-Busch in particular, dominated the American market. The company created a standard, American Pilsner beer that defined the country's taste. Let's jump into the 60s, 1960 through 64. In 1960, price of a pint, 71 cents, adjusted for inflation at $5.77. In 61, same price, but inflation was $5.68. I'm not a economics guy or anything like that. I'm just giving you the findings that I found doing the research on this. Patreon.com/The Synful Show. 1962, 71 cents, adjusted for inflation, and for $5.62. And in 63, the price of a pint was 72 cents. And inflation price was $5.64. And coming in at the end of that little timeline, 1964, it went up another penny, 73 cents, adjusted for inflation, $5.64. By the time 1960 rolled out, around the number of breweries had shrunk even further. In 1934, 756 breweries were located in the United States, yet the dominance of the massive macro breweries controlled the market, and independent brewers continued to decline. By 1960, 230 breweries remained. That count included only 140 independent operations. While the overall diversity and, some would argue, quality of American beers spiraled downward, prices became more and more manageable for consumers. We're going to move up into the summer of love time right here, 1965 through 69. 74 cents and 65, inflated price, $5.65, and 66, 75 cents, and the inflation price actually came down on that for $5.63. 1967, 76 cents, $5.54 on the inflation. 1968, 79 cents, and the inflation, adjusted inflation for that was $5.61. And in 1969, the price of the pint went up to 82 cents and adjusted for inflation, $5.58. But it could be argued that the production of steam beer in the 19th century San Francisco marked the first distinctly American beer. The style originated with brewers who were trying to craft a beer that didn't require refrigeration. For decades, the Anchor Brewing Company kept steam beer alive until it faced bankruptcy in 1965. Fritz Maytag stepped in and bought the brewery, saying America's first unique beer along with it. Not saying, but saving. Or did I say saving? Hell, I don't know. Maytag inadvertently started one of the first craft beer movements, brewing a premium product outside of the norm, created by the massively brewed Pilsners. Let's jump into the 70s. Yeah, we're getting close to where I was getting ready to get born. I was still just a glimpse in my daddy's eye at this time, 1970 through 74. 1970, 86 cents. Inflation, $5.55. 71, 89 cents, $5.43. 72, 91 cents. Adjusted for inflation, $5.32. 1973, price of a pint jumped up to 94 cents. And that inflation price, $5.32. In 1974, the pint jumped up to $1.01. And that came out to $5.38. But let's rewind a little bit. In 1968, a chemist by the name of Joseph L. Owads made a discovery that would forever change the history of beer consumption in America and throughout the world. Working for the Rheingold Brewery in New York, Owads developed the first light beer designed to cut out extra carbs and calories for the ones that are watching their figure. The Chicago brewery, Meister Brau, attempted to package and sell this new kind of beer, but it ultimately failed to turn a significant profit. So, the Miller Brewing Company bought its recipe. Yeah, Miller Lite. Let's get back onto our 70s timeline here. You're going to start seeing the price of this pint go up and up and up from 75 to 79. 1975, $1.09. Inflated price, $5.23. $1.12 and 76. And you're going to start seeing the inflation price starting to change a little bit here. 76, like I said, it was $1.12 for a pint, and the inflated price was $4.93. 1977, $1.15. Adjusted for inflation, $4.78. 1978, $1.22. Inflation price, $4.76. And 1979, the year I was born, $1.32 for a pint. Adjusted for inflation, $4.79. As most beer drinkers know now, Miller's attempt at selling the light beer resulted in massive success. It also brought a new flavor to American beer lovers' palate. Miller Lite officially launched in 1975, and other brewers such as Anheuser-Busch sought to emulate Miller's success with light beer over the next few decades. Meanwhile, Fritz Maytag's bold decision to save the Anchor Brewing Company served as a signal to other craft brewers that it was feasible to turn a profit in a country where macro brewers reigned supreme. Maytag's success offered inspiration for a home brewer named Jack McAuliffe, and a move that provided an early catalyst to America's craft brewing market. McAuliffe started the New Albion Brewing Company located in Sonoma, California. New Albion has been hailed as the first true microbrewery to arise since the death of Prohibition. The brewery introduced new kinds of stouts, pale ales, and porters to a public condition to choose between lagers and pilsners. Let's get into the 80s, 1980 through 84. 1980, $1.42 for that pint. Inflated price, $4.63. 81, $1.52. Inflated price, $4.37. 82, 1982, $1.59 for that pint, adjusted for inflation, $4.14. 1983, $1.65, that inflated price, $4.05. 84, $1.70, and that inflated price was at $4.04. We did talk about Oktoberfest, but everybody knows about Oktoberfest. where quality beer flows free and patrons from all over the world flock to revel in the art and entertainment of brewing. America first held its own version of Oktoberfest in 1982 with the inaugural Great American Beer Festival. Oh my Lord. Came to Denver. Since then, the Great American Beer Festival has grown exponentially. In fact, it remains the country's biggest ticketed beer festival. The Great American Beer Festival heralded the rise of craft brewers in America. It also helped to renew interest in home brewing as a viable and financial successful hobby. Decreasing prices no doubt helped the resurgence in niche beers as beer prices fell when adjusted for inflation from the increase in 1978. And as you can see here, we're going to jump into the not 90s, but the 80s. We're still in the 80s. In 1985, $1.75, $3.99 for that inflation. 1986, $1.83, $4.03. 1987, $1.88, $4.06 on inflation. $1.95 in the 88 with that inflation of $4.06. 1989, price goes up and inflation stayed the same, $2.03 on that pint in 89 and $4.06, same as 88. In addition to home brewing, another curious trend started to creep up on the margins of the American beer market in 1982. Burt Grant opened a new kind of bar that would slowly spread across the nation. He founded the Yakima Brewing and Malting Company, which became the first establishment in the United States to not only serve its own beer, but to offer food to its patrons as well. The new concept of a brew pub gradually gained steam up in the 1980s. By 1986, 5 brew pubs operated in the United States. Eventually, the brew pub would help to energize the resurgence of craft beers in America. Let's go into the 90s. Let's look at them prices there in the 90s, 1990 through 94. In 1990, the price of a pint, $2.13, adjusted for inflation, $4.07. 91, $2.35, $4.26 on that inflation. 1992, $2.43, and the inflation on that, $4.22, adjusted for inflation. 1993, $2.47, $4.17, adjusted for inflation. In 1994, price of that pint, $2.50. Adjusted for that inflation, $4.10. Now, the 90s marked a few important milestones in the ongoing struggle between macrobreweries and microbreweries. For example, take Sierra Nevada Pale Ale. Today it's a common beer that has become a staple in countless bars across the country. Back in 1990, the California-based brewing company stood at the forefront of the rise of craft breweries when its production totaled 31,000 barrels of beer. The reason why that number is important, it marks the point when a brewing company can no longer be defined as a microbrewery, which produces 25,000 barrels or fewer. Sierra Nevada Pale Ale growing production marked the first time a small startup microbrewery produced outside of its initial classification. The state of California reached another milestone that served to highlight the dramatic gains by independent and commercial brewing across the country. At the beginning of 1994, California had 84 breweries and brew pubs. But if you look back just 10 years prior, that number contrasts sharply with the number of breweries across the entire country. In 1984, there were just 83 breweries in the United States. All right, we're in the mid-90s now, and we're going to talk about the prices real quick. 95, $2.54, inflated price $4.06. 1996, $2.61, $4.05 on that inflation. 1997, where I graduated high school, $2.68, adjusted for inflation $4.04. 1998, $2.73. $4.03 on that inflation. 1999, $2.80. and inflation 407. As the 90s progressed, breweries continued to gain momentum in the country, but the consolidation of the beer market stayed relatively stagnant. Craft breweries might have built a taste for unique beer on the average American's palate, but they failed to reach production levels that rivaled the microbreweries. Three beer companies accounted for 81% overall market share by 2000. Anheuser-Busch produced 99.2 million barrels, Miller produced 39.8 million, Coors produced 22.7 million. That adds up to 161.7 million barrels of beer on the wall. Take one down, pass it around, 161.6 million barrels of beer on the wall in a year when domestic sales totaled 199.4 million barrels. Sorry about that little outburst there. But so that just left 37.7 million barrels that were produced and sold by other beer companies, including microbreweries. Let's get into the odds. 2000 to 2004. 288, inflated price, adjusted for inflation, 409. 2001, 295, 406 on inflation. 2002, 302. Inflation, 404. That still makes no sense to me. Sorry if I'm driving you crazy with this, but I was trying to look smart when I came up with this. 2004, 317, and adjusted for inflation, 408. Although most new breweries started in the 1980s and 1990s, stayed small, producing no more than 100,000 barrels per year. The concept of microbrewery had begun to gain traction. Microbreweries offered a new strategy. Beers didn't have to compete on the basis of price or advertising. Instead, they competed based on their characteristics. Microbreweries emphasized freshness and experimented with malt and hop flavors. The craft brewing movement that began to gain traction in the 90s really blossomed in the early 2000s. Beers from breweries such as Dogfish Head, Allagash Brewing, Avery Brewing Company, Victory Brewing Company became more visible and accessible. At the same time, imports of foreign beers began to increase their market share. By the early 2000s, they accounted for 12% of the U.S. market. In 2002, South African brewers acquired Miller, which seemed to foreshadow a more globally integrated beer market. I'll do the quick rundown for 2005 through 2009. I really don't understand the inflation price, but they're saying the price in 2005 was $3.23, 2006 $3.31, 2007 $3.41, 2008 $3.53, 2009 $3.64. And on that last one right there, you can see everything catching up. It was $3.64 and inflation was $4. The 2000s witnessed a stark reversal in the market trends that defined the beer industry following Prohibition. While the stock market crash of 2008 sent countless businesses into bankruptcy, an unexpected sector managed to keep growing. The United States consumption of craft beer increased by 10.9% in 2009, while the overall consumption of beer decreased by 2.2%. Even though companies including Anheuser-Busch and Molson Coors dominated far more of the market share, these major beer companies' sales fell, while the craft brewers enjoyed growth. That's in spite of craft brewers' tendency to sell more expensive beers. Even though microbrews cost more than the big three's beers, Anheuser-Busch, Miller, and Coors all tried to incorporate ideas from the microbrewery movement into their own lineups. 2010 to 2013, not so long ago. Price of a pint, $3.68. 2011, $3.73. 2012, $3.80. And 2013, $3.87. And that adjusted for inflation's at $3.99. So it's all lining up now. But anyone rooting for that little guy liked the look of the beer market in 2010 and onward. Craft brewing continued to gain momentum, and breweries continued to differentiate themselves with experiments and flavoring, aging methods, and even packaging. In 2011, craft breweries made headlines by putting their beers in cans. By 2012, innovative collaborations between breweries and limited releases of seasonal flavored beers also became staples on the craft brewing scene. And all this wasn't just good news for the Americans drinking the beer. In 2012, the craft brewing industry made up more than 2,700 craft brewers, provided an estimated 108,440 jobs in the U.S., plus there were more than 1 million American home brewers in 2012. Home brewing had just become legal in all 50 states for the first time since Prohibition, when Alabama finally legalized the hobby. And here we go, 2014 to 2016. 2014, on average, pint was $3.91. 2015, $3.95. 2016, $3.99. Today, the beer market continues to look starkly different than the past 50 years. Those plucky independent brewers that used to be a little anomalies on the beer landscape have now become big business. The Associated Press reported that craft beer is a $22 billion industry in the United States. And sales were up last year nearly 13%. This was 2016, so that would have been from 2015. Despite the incredible transformation of the industry, beer policy is still recovering from the impacts of the temperance movement. Many states have caps of the allowed alcohol content of beers, in addition to regulations regarding where it can be sold. Some states even forbid breweries from selling their own beer on site. Pretty interesting, huh? Yeah, so you can still see states still have control of their stuff, just like it's legal to smoke weed and have weed in certain states, and in other states it's just medically, and some states have, you're not allowed to have it. Same with beer. Poor weed. But, man, that was pretty awesome. But here's some awesome fun facts about some beer and booze and whatever. At any given time, 0.7% of the world's drunk. So 50 million people are drunk right now. Are you drunk right now? Sensoilicophobia is the fear of an empty beer glass. The world's longest hangover lasted 4 weeks after a Scotsman consumed 60 pints of beer. The strongest beer in the world has a 67.5% alcohol content. Slugs, like those slimy little creatures, they like beer. Amsterdam pays alcoholics in beer to clean streets. 5 cans of beer for a day's work plus 10 pounds in tobacco. Beer was not considered an alcoholic beverage in Russia until 2013. Until the 1970s in Belgium, table beer was served in school refectories, whatever that word is. At the wife-carrying world championship in Finland, first prize is the wife's weight in beer. There's a beer brewed from bananas in Africa. The Wat Pa Maha Chitaka temple in Thailand was constructed with 1 million bottles of Heineken and a local beer. More Guinness beer is drunk in Nigeria than Ireland. In the land of the pharaohs of Egypt, beer was a national currency. In Argentina, political parties have their own brands of beer. Norway's first aircraft hijacking was resolved after the hijacker surrendered his weapon in exchange for more beer. With scientist Niels Bohr won the Nobel Prize in 1922, the Carlsberg Brewery gave him a perpetual supply of beer piped into his house. In 1963, Albert Heineken created a beer bottle that could also be used as a brick to build sustainable housing in impoverished countries. As a rule of thumb, darker and bitter beers have higher alcohol content. In the 13th century, some people in Norway would baptize their children with beer. You could swim in pools of beer in Austria. 162,719 pints of Guinness beer are wasted each year due to mustaches. President Jimmy Carter signed a bill that created an exemption from taxation of beer brewed at home for personal or family use, opening the door for today's craft beer brewers. In France, Germany, Austria, Spain, and the Netherlands, they serve beer in McDonald's. Fucking Hell is a beer named after the village of Fucking in Austria. There's a brewery in Germany that's almost 1,000 years old. It has been in continuous operation since the year 1040. Beer and vaginas have almost the same acidity levels with an average pH of 4.5. Beer was illegal in Iceland until March 1st, 1989. Now, the date is celebrated every year in Reykjavik as Bjordagar or Beer Day. Beer cans in Japan have Braille on them so blind people don't confuse alcoholic drinks with soft drinks. Joan Evans is the only person on the earth capable of balancing 237 pints of beer atop his head. In 1956, the U.S. exploded atomic bombs near a few beers to see if they are safe to drink. They are indeed. Carlsberg Special Brew Beer was created for Winston Churchill in 1950 on the behest of the Danish government. Table beer, 1.5% alcohol, was served in Belgian schools until the 80s. I think I already said that. A traditional beer tap will not work on an airplane as it will only dispense a huge amount of foam. So how about them facts there, guys? How about the Synful Show? I love doing this show. So it takes me quite a bit of time to get this research together for maybe, I usually run about 45 minutes. This one's running about the same time, close to 10 hours this time. But you could take 30 seconds and leave me a positive 5-star review on iTunes. Just say, I love beer. Hell yeah. We all love beer. Make sure you're following me on Twitter, Instagram. You can also join our closed group in Facebook, the Synful Nation. Oh yeah. Just got to answer one simple question. Very easy to do. A lot of other sinners in there. But till next time, stay sinful, my friends.